Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. Christian Horner is not backing down over the budget cap row, stating that the teams that claims they were cheating based on the 2021 budget cap breach should actually apologise to Red Bull, and that Red Bull have nothing to apologise for. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Charles Leclerc back in the simulator in Maranello ahead of the Brazilian Grand Prix. Quick note on the Chinese Grand Prix, rumours circulating that indeed it will be cancelled. The policy that China has got going on is not exactly conducive to having a race there. Zhou Guanyu, I'm sure, would love it to happen. I know that Ted Kravitz mentioned in his notebook this week, I think on one of the days he said that Zhou had said that, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. And then the other day he said that he was still hopeful it would happen, but turns out it's not going to happen. Not exactly a massive surprise. If, though, there is no Chinese Grand Prix, that puts it to, 23 races instead. What replacement will there be, if any, for China? Will they have another track in mind? Because Kyalami, I think the South African Grand Prix was meant to be on the calendar next year. That didn't happen, so whether they can make that happen, whether they stick it at 23, I don't know. But yeah, unfortunate scenes, of course, but still pretty inevitable over the last few weeks, to be honest. Let's talk about the Red Bull drama then, because it's been a lot going on lately with regard to Red Bull over the last few weeks. The Verstappen, a kind of Sky boycott that was going on just this past weekend in Mexico, but before that as well, Red Bull under fire for quite several weeks about breaching the cost cap in 2021. They went over it by about $2 million, $2.2 million, and there was questions as to how much of that money could have been spent on the car. Red Bull denied that any of it was actually spent on the car, it was other sources, but other teams are like, well look, if you spent more money on your catering or whatever, then that's money you should have spent less on your car, and that's maybe what other teams did to hit the cap. So, you know, whatever way you look at it, if you're over the cap, you're over the cap, and teams are going to say what they're going to say. Breaching the rules is going to carry a punishment. The punishment was delivered, 10% reduction to their testing time for the next 12 months, and then also a $7 million fine. Pretty irrelevant though, all things considered, to Red Bull. And even recently, Red Bull have confirmed they were going to bring more upgrades this season, but they've decided not to do that just because, you know, they want to make sure they hit the budget cap this season, right? They can't afford to go over it twice in a row, and therefore they'll curtail those upgrades, which does mean that next year's car is going to probably come out the gate next season significantly better than this year's one is. But Red Bull do have to be careful, because the FIA did find that they didn't find any evidence that Red Bull deliberately went over the cap in 2021, but, you know, if it was to happen again, you would imagine the cost cap, you know, the punishment, let's say, for a double infringement in back-to-back seasons would be significantly more serious than just doing it on a one-off occasion. So Red Bull have got to be careful, of course, and Christian Horner has come out with several statements on this. He was not particularly happy about some of the words coming out from other teams, but also the leaks that were going around. As he goes on to say here, there was certainly no cheating involved, which has been alleged in certain quarters, so I don't feel that we need to apologise. There's some statements probably in regard to what Zach Brown of McLaren said. He wrote a statement to the FIA, wrote a letter stating that, in his opinion, these teams that, cheated should face serious repercussions. And Christian Horner saying, no, we didn't cheat. It was simply a misunderstanding of the regulations. Now, look, of course, Christian Horner's going to be on that side of the discussion, and the other teams are going to be on the other side of the discussion. But there's also some points about the actual leaks in general and how the leaks were allowed to happen, whether, that should be something that's looked into, because it was strange that in Singapore, we heard all these rumours that, oh yeah, there's two teams over the cap. One of them is kind of Aston Martin, that's not really over, but just has a procedural breach, and one of them is majorly over. And then you look back a few weeks later and you think, you know what, those initial leaks were pretty correct. Yes, Red Bull weren't as over as initially was being discussed, but they were still over the cap by a significant margin. So those initial leaks we saw in Singapore were confirmed about 2 weeks later as being pretty damn accurate. So how did that even happen if the FIA is meant to be, and the people deciding this is meant to, keep their lips shut about this type of stuff? How did that come out? And Christian Horner is not so happy about it, right? So as he goes on to say here, the accusations made in Singapore were extremely upsetting for every single member of our staff, our partners, everyone involved within Red Bull. Obviously, any form of leakage is hugely worrying, is something that we expect to be followed up on. Goes on to say this on the apology. Probably he reckons Red Bull are due an apology from some of our rivals for some of the claims they have made, and that he and the team would make no apology for the way we've performed and the way we have acted. We have to take it on the chin. We would, have made some mistakes or whatever. In hindsight, we made some mistakes. We can change things around. No intent, nothing being dishonest, etc., etc. We've taken a, public pounding is the wording he uses to describe how Red Bull have, had to deal with this situation over the past few weeks. Many would say, look, you put it on yourself at the end of the day. They overspent the cap, therefore you deal with the consequences. And Red Bull probably suffer less with this than other teams would, because Red Bull at the end of the day, they're an energy drink company. If they're seen, like, let's say their public brand perception and image is to be a team that, you know, pushes the rules, you know, sometimes breaks the rules a little bit, breaks the boundaries, like, okay, maybe the sponsors and partners aren't so happy with that, but Red Bull themselves, that's kind of aligned in a way with their brand identity, right? Whereas if a Mercedes or an Audi or, you know, even a Ferrari is seen to be cheating or breaking the rules, then that has far more impact, you could argue, on their brand image than it would for Red Bull, who, you know, they can almost lean into it in a way. Of course, they're not going to do that, and there is damage to their partners and sponsors and this type of stuff, but it's probably not so bad for Red Bull to breach it, whereas the other teams have to 100% guarantee and make sure they're within it, because otherwise their actual, you know, their parent company in a way suffers extremely from a brand reputation perspective. So do you think the Christian Horner's owed any apology by these other teams? I mean, I think Zach Brown's words are kind of the key ones that he's looking at here when Zach Brown said that they effectively cheated the rules to allow this to happen. Now, look, you can argue whether cheated is a term that should have been thrown around there. At the end of the day, if you're, you know, breaching the limits, then, you know, if you're breaking the rules in any other way, is that cheating, right? For example, Mercedes, when the rear wing or whatever was 0.5 millimeters over the limit at Brazil, when Hamilton got sent to the back of the grid, is that cheating, right? You know, you could argue that was unintentional. So, you know, there's always a debate that's going to be had about that. Is Horner owed an apology? I don't really think so, to be perfectly honest, because at the end of the day, his team was the one that breached the cap, and it does seem a fair bit like, you know, Horner's trying to effectively play the victim here. And as Toto Wolff has said before, that the reality is that it's not Red Bull and Christian Horner that are the victims of them overspending. It's the other 9 teams that had to deal with the advantages the Red Bull have gained for doing exactly that. The teams are going to have their different perspectives. The other point as well is on that leaked information, right? Because like Toto Wolff shut down the argument that his former kind of advisor, Shaileran Rao, who now works for the FIA, could potentially be leaking any of this information, right? That's been the accusation from, I think, Helmut Marko of Red Bull has stated that, yeah, I wonder why Toto Wolff got this information, because his former advisor is now working for the people who deal with this cost cap breach type stuff. Now, Toto Wolff has shut this down, saying it's nonsense, nothing to do with it, and said that's just Red Bull trying to shift the focus away from their own stuff. But, you know, is Toto Wolff saying this also an attempt to shift the focus away from potential connections there Mercedes might have within the FIA? Like, there was also those rumours earlier on where they made the technical directive that, you know, Mercedes had got a tip off from the people at the FIA that, yeah, they were going to change the rules in this way with the technical directive, therefore they can start to adjust their car, right? So it's always a bit of drama going on with that as to whether the leaks that come out are actually a really serious deal, and that some teams might actually be getting preferential treatment in terms of who gets this information before other teams from certain leaks. Where do these leaks come from? Whether that needs to be investigated. I think Horner's certainly right on the money that we need to try and shut this type of stuff down. So we can be off the mark on one thing, he can certainly be on the mark with some other things. One question I do have as well that was raised over the past few minutes actually was the Red Bull conversation in the future. How long is Sergio Perez going to be there for? Will they look for another driver in the near future to partner Max Verstappen? That is the history of Max Verstappen. Whoever you partner him with, their life doesn't really last too long generally in Red Bull. Perez, I think, has done a stellar job. He might finish, probably will finish P2 in this year's Drivers' Championship, but Horner reckons that in the past and potentially in the future, they've had conversations with Lando Norris. He reckons every time we've had a conversation, the next day he signed a new contract with McLaren. So look, we'll see. What do you think the future is for Lando? Because he's got until 2025, I believe, on his McLaren deal. When that ends, if the car isn't competitive, he will go elsewhere. If Hamilton has retired at that point, like the Norris-Russell potential partnership with Mercedes could be very interesting, but also, you know, who knows what the situation is with Red Bull down the line, and even over the next couple of years, depending on the situation, if Perez moves on, if they want another driver. But I think even Norris has kind of not exactly declined that opportunity, but I'm quite happy with where he is at McLaren, because, like, you look, stepping into the seat alongside Verstappen in his own domain is maybe not always the best idea, even though it does give you a chance to win races. If you want to win a championship, it might be better to stick with your team and hope they can build a championship winning car. One quick thing to close out the video here with, actually, because earlier in the video, we talked about the Chinese Grand Prix being gone and the Las Vegas Grand Prix is coming in for next season as well. Apparently, there's some interest in a Caribbean Grand Prix. This is a rumored layout. I have no idea where this has come from, where this is even meant to be held, but this is supposedly a rumored layout for a Caribbean Grand Prix coming in not next year, but either 2024 or 2025 in Colombia. So I'm not sure if this is like already a pre-built circuit, or this is just like a mock-up design of what a track could look like. But yeah, here you go. First thoughts, it reminded me a little bit of Miami, but just on the way that, you know, the first corner and stuff is and all that. But yeah, what do you guys think about this on the whole? My initial impression is there's a fair few like medium speed corners, which might not be the best for overtaking. Like this final sector is like, I mean, look at this. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, but maybe it actually works out rather well. I don't know. It's interesting. The pit straight is relatively long. There's a kind of curvy back straight here, almost like Australia. And I don't know. Yeah, 90-degree corners. It doesn't look absolutely woeful, but it doesn't look fantastic in my opinion. These kind of S's in the final sector as well may also hinder the overtaking potential that's already going to be hindered a fair bit by all of these curves around here. Maybe the new cars make this work better, but early days on this one, but just wanted to show you guys a potential Grand Prix track layout that we might have on the calendar for the Caribbean Grand Prix in 2024 in Colombia. It would be interesting, but far from guaranteed as it stands. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.